Welcome to the podcast, Restore Yourself, Restore Your Marriage, where it's all about discovering the thoughts that get you in the mood, the thoughts that get you out of the mood, and how creating a deeper connection with yourself creates a deeper connection with your spouse. I'm your coach, Shelly Anderson, coaching you through life, love, and intimacy.
This is episode number 103, the 5 phases of the intimacy journey.
Is it like throughout life?
It can be.
So like long-term and short-term?
Yeah, for sure.
The journey of intimacy.
Yes.
Forever, the forever, never-ending journey.
Yes. And I think the reason we feel like this is such an important topic to discuss is that usually when someone comes to me as a client, they're struggling with one or two aspects of intimacy. But part of the problem is that their understanding of intimacy is limited to just one aspect of this whole journey.
Or maybe two.
Yeah.
Right, but not the whole trek usually.
Yes. And so what we want to do is kind of talk about what this whole journey looks like, because there are definitely different phases and they're distinct. And if we don't know that and we're struggling, we may just think that intimacy, the whole thing, is a challenge, when maybe we just have a challenge in one part of it.
Well, as I've learned about intimacy, the one thing I've picked up for myself is that it's a whole bunch of little journeys. And they all add up to the big journey, right? Which is the overall connection that we have. But there's always like little treks happening at the same time.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
I mean, it's not always like that, right? I'm focused on one, but there's different aspects of your life and different types of situations. And even in our relationship, we have different types of intimacies that can all happen at different times.
Yes, so true. So what we want to talk about are these 5 different phases of intimacy. And even though the title is the intimacy journey, these 5 phases of the intimacy journey, when we go through this section in our course called the Intimacy Effect, we actually call it a trek. And the reason that I think this is such a unique way to describe intimacy is that if we think of the word trek, we can think of pioneers crossing the plains, right? There's hills, there's valleys, there's rocks, there's mud, all types of elements and obstacles. We never really think of the pioneers just walking across the plains with ease.
Well, no.
Like it was just like such an easy thing and that it was meant to be easy.
Like there was already a nice like paved road for them to go across.
Right. And so when we think about the pioneers, we are like, oh man, that would be so hard. Like that's a tough journey.
Well, what makes that kind of journey worth it?
Is the effort, is going through those hard things and kind of coming out on the other side, knowing that, hey, you could have just given up. You could have just thrown in the towel, but you were able to push through, push forward, and then you reach this awesome destination on the other side.
My question is, what makes somebody do something like that? What is that valuable? Because I'm not going to cross the plains for a bag of pretzels.
Well, no. Everyone has to have their reason for doing it.
Yeah, but I mean, like, what are some of those reasons that people do things like that? They're pretty important.
Well, I think if someone comes to try and get help with intimacy, it's usually because the main goal is to help improve marriage. Like something's not going right and they value marriage. They value the relationship. And it could be that there are a lot of things that are going really well in the relationship, but this is something that they still really struggle with. They don't know how to approach it differently. Or it seems like, oh my gosh, intimacy is this huge thing and it's either in me already to want to be intimate or it's just not there. So they think it's too big of a problem to solve. But they're going to put forth the effort if they really value marriage and the relationship.
So you got to love somebody first before you really put in the effort.
Yeah. And you have to love yourself too, because I think if you're really struggling with intimacy, like that is a very personal thing that you're struggling with.
Now, let me ask you this. I think to put forth that kind of effort, you have to at least admire somebody and to see the goodness of that relationship. Love may be even too strong of a word for some people. But as you go through this intimacy trek, is the goal here just good intimacy, or is the goal here closer love and connection?
Obviously, I think it would be the relationship, the more, more closeness, more connection, and intimacy would be part of it.
Because I can think about this intimacy trek as like from missionary style to S&M.
Yeah.
Right? So if I'm just thinking about it from a sexual way, maybe I think of some like intimacy journey, like what's that? That sounds pretty like kinky and weird. Right? So, and I ask you these questions because I don't know what the answer is for anyone other than myself, right? And I think you're a better gauge of the way that people are going to hear what I say on this podcast. But I think it's really easy for people to hear intimacy trek and think the goal is just to have better physical intimacy.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
And I know that this is what you preach, this is what you teach all the time, right? But the intimacy trek, this is from a male's perspective, and you're going to go through all these things. But can I just say that this is going to give you much better sex, physical sex,
right?
No doubt about it. But that's not the end all be all, nor is that the pinnacle of what we're talking about.
Right. And I think you do bring up a good point, because I think they're maybe when someone hears that title, like it's just to take them further down the sex road. Like, oh, well, we haven't done that yet. If I go on this intimacy trek, then we're going to be exploring every avenue that there is. And I think, right, we have to just say straight up, well, that's not what the intimacy trek actually is.
The intimacy trek is meant to give males and females a better experience with intimacy.
Yes.
Whether that's physical intimacy, emotional intimacy, whatever you want to call it, this is to help you guys learn how to better love your spouse, your wife, right? Because I'm speaking from a man's point of view. It will take you places that you don't even realize you need to go. And for women, you're welcome. We're teaching your men how to love you. Just kidding. That was a little bit harsh at the end there. But seriously, like this is geared more toward helping women for sure in general. But this episode right here, if you want to have your husband listen to one with you, this is probably a good one.
Yeah, it's really good. Okay, so we're going to go through the 5 different phases. But right before we do that, I want to start off with this, because we brought this up in quite a few podcasts, and I think it's going to be so valuable to start off with this key point, and that is this. The brain is the first sex organ. This is one of my favorite things to actually teach people, because if we can start with this fact in mind, that the brain is the first sex organ, then everything that we explain on the intimacy trek is going to make so much sense.
Can I just tell a quick guy's joke?
Yes.
Or a boy's joke?
Yes.
If the brain is the first sex organ, is that the thing underneath on the bottom of my penis that looks like a brain?
No.
Just kidding.
Okay, so let's talk about the 5 phases of the intimacy trek. Okay, phase number 1, this has to do with our thoughts. Who would have guessed, right? If the brain is the first sex organ, we've got to very, very strongly pay attention to what is going on in our brain. And this means in the form of our thoughts. Now, for women, so many things are connected for us. I was watching like a comedy skit the other night. I was talking about husbands and wives and just like the different ways that, they approach certain things, like either problems or conversations. And they were just talking about the women and how their brain is just like a big, like it's wire, like everything, all the pieces are connected. And if you start talking about one thing, the wife is going to connect it to all the other parts of her life. Everything is very interwoven. And so when we really take the time to consider that the first phase of the intimacy track has to do with our thoughts, we have to really consider what our thoughts are. That means we need to increase our own awareness of our thoughts. Now, this is something that adults have the ability to do that children do not. They will just say the first thing that comes out of their mind. If you ask them, what are you thinking? They don't have the ability to reflect on their own thinking and then think about their thinking and whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. But adults have that ability. And so the good thing is if we're struggling, we can now tap into this ability that we probably never did when we were younger.
So point number 1, guys, the first sex organ is the brain, right? So if you're messing with your wife's brain, if it's messed up in any way, she shouldn't blame you for that. And we'll get into that later. That's more advanced classes, but help her with her brain, help her have good thoughts, help her have positive thoughts. Think about her, right? Focus on her and not just her parts.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. And so because everything is so connected for women, it's not like we can just say, well, what are my thoughts just about sex, right? That's part of it.
Yeah.
That is a big part of it. But it's also to take a look at well, what are my thoughts when I wake up in the morning? Even if they're not related to intimacy, because they're probably not. They're going to be about your to-do list, right? All the things you have to get done in the day, the stress levels go up. And so if throughout the day, let's say you're going through your to-do list and you see that the floor needs to be swept, and all of a sudden you're starting to think super negative things like, this is always on my shoulders to sweep up the crumbs. My kids are so messy. Why isn't my husband helping out more? Those are thoughts. These are all the thoughts that run through our mind. And so because everything is so connected, even though those specific thoughts are not related to intimacy, they will have an effect on intimacy. And so it's important to really have that awareness, where are my thoughts throughout the day? Am I having thoughts that are just creating so much stress in my life? Am I having thoughts that are just negative and critical and doubtful? It takes a little bit of reflection, right? To be able to say, wow, my thoughts are going quite negative most of the day. No wonder I don't want to be intimate at night. So it's really important to increase that awareness of your thoughts and also to take it a step further and say, what are my thoughts about? Are my thoughts that are negative, are they just about myself, my own abilities? Maybe you feel like you don't measure up to the so-called porn standards of today, or, you're not a size 0. You may have negative thoughts about yourself and your abilities to satisfy your husband. It could be a lot of negative thoughts that really are towards yourself.
Well, it's really easy to have negative thoughts.
Yes. It's probably it's easier to have negative thoughts than it is to actually have the positive thoughts.
Well, yeah, because everything is stacked against you.
Yes.
Right? The world is not set up to help people to have positive thoughts.
Right. So that's one form of the thoughts that we're having throughout the day is, what we think about ourselves. The next form would be what we think about our spouse, right? If we're looking at our to-do list and we're feeling stressed and our thoughts can really run away with us when it comes to our spouse. And that's what you were talking about with blame. We can feel like a victim. We can get stuck labeling and criticizing our spouse. We can get stuck in all these traps that are really geared towards our spouse. And if that's happening, multiple times a day, then when it comes time to being intimate, all we're going to do is pull up all those negative thoughts we had throughout the day and be like, yeah, right.
You're hitting on some stuff that gets pretty deep, and we're not going to get that deep. So check out Shelly's course. It's called The Intimacy Effect at shelly.andersoncoaching.com. And that course is amazing. It goes through all of this in depth.
Yes.
But it's super important. And incredibly helpful to know.
Yes. And I think the last form to consider of your thoughts is, we've already talked about ourselves, we've talked about thoughts about our spouse, is what are your actual thoughts about intimacy? What are they? Are they positive? Are they negative? Take the time to actually reflect and observe your own thoughts and be aware of them and be compassionate with yourself about them. So doing that alone, when you consider that the brain is the first sex organ, like you're addressing the first sex organ right off the bat.
Yeah. Well, and that's where all the other hormones come from and all of the neurotransmitters that we like about sex.
Yes.
Good. Okay.
The other time to actually check back in with your thoughts is during intercourse. It's during sex, right? And we've made this joke plenty of times, especially in the beginning of our marriage, where my brain would wander and I would rearrange the house and redecorate, certain rooms while in the middle of intercourse. Like my brain just left the building. And so if our brain does that, it is very hard to enjoy the other parts of the intimacy trek. It feels like such a struggle. And then we're like, why is this so challenging? It's because we're not being mindful during the actual process. Our mind has wandered.
Well, guys don't have to be as mindful.
It's true.
Which makes it challenging.
Yeah.
Now, I will say that as you progress on this trek over time, you'll become more mindful. You can't help it. You're going to become more mindful because you're going to care what your wife thinks and how she feels and what's happening with her brain and her trek. And that'll become important to you because the quality of your love and your intimacy will increase so much that you will start to focus on the quality rather than the quantity.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, it's just important that everyone understands that this trek in general is more along the lines of how women are made and what they need. That just doesn't mean that every woman needs this, but I would say every human needs this over time once you learn that you need it. A lot of people don't realize they need it.
Yeah, that's true.
A lot of people a lot of women even have been able to go right to sex because they enjoy it enough that that's just what it is to them. There's plenty of women who think about sex the same way men do.
Yeah.
But when you start unlocking the doors of the other parts of the intimacy and the intimacy trek, that physical part is beyond what you can describe to anybody who's never been married and worked towards something like that.
Yeah, it's so true. And so the last part to consider when we're thinking about our thoughts, we've talked about what are our thoughts throughout the day, long before intercourse happens, and then during intercourse, and then finally, where are our thoughts after intercourse? And believe it or not, a lot of my clients, they'll say, like, I just cry after intercourse. They hide. They go and hide, and then they cry. That means there's a lot of thoughts there that are negative about that experience. And so it's important to pay attention to your thoughts at those different times in this whole process. Okay, so that was phase 1. So moving on to phase 2 is that when you are able to increase your awareness of your thoughts, you also increase your ability to choose thoughts. And so you can start choosing thoughts that are more positive and that are more beneficial to yourself and to the relationship, which will lead you right into phase 2, which is our emotions, our desire, our emotional desire. This is where most of my clients struggle. They feel that they do not have this. Or if they do have it, they feel guilty about it, right? They feel like it's somehow naughty and evil. But most of my clients, they feel like they do not have this, and that it's kind of like just a given thing. They either have it and they were born to have it, or they don't, and that they were born to not have like a strong desire to be intimate.
And I think that's probably possible, that some people are just not born with that desire or those feelings. Like there's hormonal things, but in general, women are made, probably even more than men are, to have strong sexual energy and feelings.
Well, and here's the thing, right? There are some women that are going to face problems with their hormones and the balance. There's no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that when women feel like they don't have a strong desire to be intimate, they're going to think that that is the problem,
Right.
that it's hormonal. When it's actually, that is just a really small number of women who
That's a
have
much
that.
smaller number
It's
than people
much
think.
smaller. So that means that there's something bigger going on. And what that means is we're not feeling that desire, and we think it just should exist. What we don't understand is that desire is something that humans generate within themselves.
Well, it's like love, right? Love is a verb.
Yes.
To be in love with anything, you have to give to receive, right? There's that symbiosis. And so a lot of people will do the work just so that they can be compatible enough. Well, that doesn't stop just being compatible.
Right.
Continue to work on that until you're totally one, and that includes all types of intimacy.
Yes. And so this notion that, like I'm just not that way. I just don't have that drive. Well, that's not really correct. The more correct way of thinking about it is like, well, I haven't tuned into that side. I don't know how to awaken that part of myself. I haven't learned that. And that's okay.
I can teach you how to do
Yeah,
that.
like, right? It's like,
We
that's
learn how to do
okay.
that together.
Yes. And you weren't meant to know that when you were young. The brain was not ready for that. It's not meant for that. But as an adult in a committed relationship, yes, that is the perfect place to say this is the right time to learn about it, to tap into it, to develop it, to increase it, and to generate it. See, this is, I think, what women don't know is if you feel like you are lacking a desire to be intimate, you have complete control over that.
Yeah.
You can generate that desire to be intimate, even if you don't know how yet. It is totally available and it can happen.
I've seen this happen for Shelley.
Yes.
I've seen it firsthand, and I've seen how she did it, and it's amazing. So I'm a witness to it.
Yes. And I think this is kind of like one of those things that is like never talked about. We always just talk about, oh, the husband has the higher sex drive and the woman has the low sex drive. And so the husband's always chasing the wife and the wife's always like, leave me alone. No, that may be a small part of it, but again, it's so minor. The bigger point is we can generate that desire within ourselves, and we can do it with our thoughts. Again, this is why thoughts are key. And it's okay if you don't understand how to do that, but just know that is something you generate within yourself. You don't need anything on the outside to generate a desire for intimacy. You can do that with your thoughts.
The self-coaching model is the coaching philosophy that Shelley studied in, and I love everything about it. I think it fits right in with any other truth.
Yeah.
And if you want to learn more about the self-coaching model, go to shelley.andersoncoaching.com.
Yes. Here's the other thing that is really important to start to allow to percolate in our thoughts about desire and having a desire for intimacy is that for women, for the majority of us, it is not the drive that is often described in books and in culture, movies, all those kinds of things. We usually hear of like the libido as a sex drive. And so if we're married for like 15 years and we've never felt that, we're going to start to think something's majorly wrong with us. But that's because for most women, it's not a drive at all. For men, it is. For women, we don't feel pushed into wanting to be intimate. It's a pull. What draws us in to be closer to our husband? What draws us closer to him where we would want to share the deepest parts of ourselves and to be vulnerable with him? That is a draw, which is so different than being pushed into something. And so if we're going to go back to the analogy of the trek and the pioneers, think about the pioneers in their carts, right? Their covered wagons. And they had oxen in the front to pull, the wagon forward. And the oxen are not in the back, like just pushing it. They need to be able to have the vision of where they're going. They need to be able to see everything that's in their environment and be able to know how to navigate that. And women are very much geared this way. Like we're looking at our environment constantly, and we constantly have thoughts about it, which means we need to learn how to navigate what's going on around us and be able to use the life coaching skills and the model to be able to channel those thoughts in a way that actually generate the desire to want to be intimate. So that's something that we do for ourselves. It's not something that we wait around and hope that it happens to us, or we don't say, hey, it's our husband's job to make us feel the desire to be intimate. No, we generate that.
I can help.
Yeah,
But
totally.
I can help and I can do my part, but it's really not up to me.
And it's not dependent on that. And I think that's the part we really have to make sure we realize is that we have the power within us to generate the desire for intimacy. And I think this is it's never talked about this way.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So, okay. So that is the second phase. Now, if you are able to realize and accept that you can generate this power within yourself to want to be intimate, that will easily take you into the next phase, which is the third phase, which is physical arousal. And this means that now your body is going to respond, right? We've talked about the mind. We've talked about our emotions, which is the heart. And now we're going to talk about the body, what our body does. This is when we enter the phase of physical arousal. So our body starts to take over. Our body is actually going to go through its own process to be prepared for the physical aspect of intercourse. That means romance and foreplay all become very important aspects to get lubrication going so that intercourse is more pleasurable, right? And we need to prepare the body.
Or get your own lube out. Doesn't hurt.
Right. So if we don't know about this phase of physical arousal and we're just like, hey, let's just get into it, we are skipping over some steps that actually make intercourse more enjoyable.
And for those that have a hard time orgasming,
Yeah.
this is something that can really help with that. And look, I don't know. You have to with your spouse really explore that, but take your time.
Yeah. So physical arousal, this is usually one of the sections that is most often portrayed in media. And it's usually the men's type of arousal. And we're not going to get into all that right now, but men have a certain type of arousal and women have another. And so what we see on media is like this really fast, spontaneous arousal. And then we move right into the fourth phase, which is sex and intercourse. So what we grow up looking at and thinking is how intimacy is supposed to work skips the first two steps altogether. And so that leaves us with a very inaccurate picture of how everything is actually connected and can lead to the next phase more easily. So the fourth phase, like I just said, is intercourse and orgasm.
Can I stop you for a second, though?
Yeah.
The third phase, physical arousal.
Yeah.
We do touch on that in media. We see that, but it's very quick. And I just want to make the point that that third step can last as long as you want it to.
Yes.
And the longer it lasts, the better the actual sex part's going to be.
Yeah, because our bodies are more prepared.
Yeah, and you can have plenty of fun, and maybe that's where you orgasm if you have a hard time orgasming with sex.
Right.
Excuse my voice, I'm losing it.
Okay. So, yeah, so then we go into this fourth phase of having actual sex, having intercourse, and the orgasm. Now, the good thing to know about this is that I think both of those are options, right? Like you can have both sex and an orgasm, or you can say, you know what, tonight I just want intercourse. I'm not into the orgasm tonight. Like orgasms take a lot out of a woman physically. Sometimes she may not be in the mood for the orgasm, but maybe in the mood for intercourse. Or it may be the other way where she's like, I don't think I want the intercourse tonight, but I'm ready for an orgasm.
Yeah.
Again, or it could be both. And so being it's all normal. They're all options, and it's a really good way to be able to approach that phase. Now, after that has taken place, it moves us to the 5th phase, which is the afterglow. And again, this is a great place
To have a cigarette.
like in the movies.
Yeah.
To allow all those good hormones to flow through, recognize that is like a major response of the body, is to have those hormones that connect husband and wife to be closer. And so pay attention to, again, the thoughts that happen, but know that there's some stuff happening physically as well
and I think,
in that phase.
I think spiritually too. We've talked about this before in our podcast, but that's kind of the time to meditate too for me.
Yeah.
I've had some really incredible insights during that time.
The afterglow.
But that's only when we go through all the steps of the trek. If we just go have like a quickie and we go right to sex, the afterglow is not even this. It's not even afterglow.
Yeah.
But when you go through the whole trek and you spend a lot of time on that trek before you even have sex, the longer you go there, the better the afterglow is.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Just a few final thoughts as we wrap up. If you're struggling with intimacy, then I would really suggest going through these 5 phases in order. They all build on each other, or it makes each phase easier.
So starting with thoughts, then
Desire,
emotional desire, physical arousal, intercourse, and orgasm, and afterglow.
Yes. So if you are feeling like, hey, I'm just, again, like that desire to be intimate is not there, it's all blocked up. Well, that's phase 2. That means you need to take a step back and really look at phase 1 of your thoughts, because it's your thoughts that are currently blocking your natural desire for intimacy to flow through. So you can always, like if you're struggling with one part, go back steps and phases and reassess. Yeah. It's awesome. If you're not struggling so much with intimacy, just knowing about all the phases can add like newness and excitement to what you're already experiencing. And it can allow you more of a mix and match experience. And so you don't necessarily have to go through them in order. But if at any point the struggles do come back up, go back to the sequence, because that just means you're probably thinking something negative and you haven't addressed it. So just go right back to the beginning and go through the phases in order. And as Nick talked about, we've given you a brief but important summary of this intimacy trek. And we do go into these phases in more depth in the course, the intimacy effect. So if you really want to dive deeper and know what is included in emotional desire, like what blocks it, what actually releases it, how to become more in tune and awaken that dormant desire of yours, or if you're wondering like what is involved in physical arousal, we dive into all of those in so much detail in that course. So check it out at shelly.andersoncoaching.com. The course is called The Intimacy Effect. Okay, any final thoughts as we wrap up?
No, I just think that communication's huge as you go through this. So the advice I'd give women with their husbands is, as you're going through this, just learn about it for you. I wouldn't go just push it on them right away.
No.
But you can use this as talking points for you. to share some of the things that maybe you discover about your intimacy trek. Because as much as it seems like we might not care as much as you'd like, we do. We care. And I'm pretty confident that most husbands would like to know how to better treat their lady. I think almost every single man out there would want to do that. So, but it takes a wife that's willing to be open about it, and someone's got to open their mouth first, and the conversations that come will cause deeper connection on their own.
True. So we hope that you will be able to think about these 5 phases of the intimacy trek and allow some time for some personal reflection on them. And because remember, the more you restore this type of intimacy with yourself, the more you can restore it with your spouse. Thank you so much for listening today, and we hope you will join us again next week.